Do you believe in the supernatural? In occurrences that our minds couldn't possibly make sense of? I had no such beliefs. I was a bit jaded at the time, in fact. I had just moved back to the small town where I was born, out in the middle of nowhere. I had no other place to go after things didn't work out in the city. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 7, but we were far enough into the fall that the sun had already sunk well below the horizon. I was sitting in one of the study rooms in the library, reading an old comic book about gods and monsters and the heroes who slew them. The book provided a well-needed release from the exhaustion that comes with life. I'd spent the whole day job hunting, demoralized, because it seemed as though even coffee shops required a degree these days. But now I reclined, worrying only about whether or not the hero would emerge victorious in his current escapade. His problems were far removed from mine. The loneliness and aimlessness that I dealt with seemed insignificant next to the horrors and injustice he seemed to thwart so effortlessly. His world offered freedom and opportunity, which made it easy to forget the realities which bound me in my own. I held a universe in my hands, but the space I sat in was small, with only a single desk, a hanging light, and a large portrait on the back wall. The portrait wasn't out of place for a library, featuring a young woman in a red dress. However, it did seem a little too large for the room. The room itself was quiet, much quieter than at home, where I'd have to deal with my family nagging me to get a job, move on with my life. Then again, too much quiet carried its own set of issues. It was too easy to wallow in my thoughts. The world in the comic book was engrossing, but the insecurities and doubts plaguing my mind had a hold on me that seemed to trump all else nowadays. My focus strayed from the courageous hero's fight with the dreadful Hydra. I wondered if I'd hear back about any of those jobs I'd applied to today. I usually didn't. I felt so useless. I wondered if I'd ever find love again. My loneliness was starting to get to me, prodding at all of my insecurities. Would things be this way forever? Were all of my misfortunes a result of my own incompetence, or was I simply unlucky? Or perhaps the world is simply blind to your suffering, and your abilities and luck mean nothing to it. A voice cut through the air like a light breeze on a soundless night. The voice was airy and sweet, yet confident and deliberate. And, oddly, it seemed to emanate from the painting in front of me. Taken aback, but convinced I wasn't hallucinating, I asked the only question that made sense. Who are you? Though I stared rather intensely at the painting, the woman in red did not move. However, the voice did respond, seemingly amused by my confusion. My name is Vera. That painting in front of you is me. It sounded like you needed some company. I was still shocked, obviously, but I didn't doubt what I was told. She seemed sincere, as outlandish as the circumstances of our meeting may have been. Because of this, and likely my own loneliness, I indulged the apparition in the painting, and we began to talk. I mostly asked questions at first. I wanted to know how she was talking to me, who she was, and why she chose to speak to me. I soon found that Vera was a much better conversationalist than I was, and I ended up with more questions than answers. I did glean from the redirection in side conversations that she was once part of this world, and that she was just as lonely as I. In spite of the mystery surrounding her, it wasn't long before Vera had gained my trust. She was pleasant, yet honest, unafraid to share her views of the world, no matter how radical they seemed. She was interesting and knowledgeable, shockingly worldly for a woman confined to a painting. I also found that she was an excellent listener. I vented not only my doubts and worries, but my hopes and dreams, revealing to this strange stranger information that I never managed to admit to even myself. We spoke for hours. The library probably should have closed, but it seemed as though time stopped while we were talking. It was a wonder that I finally decided during a lull in the conversation that I should head home. After all, I had another long day ahead of me tomorrow, and it must have been near midnight by now. I thanked my host for her time and promised I'd be back, a promise which I very much intended to keep. I reached for the doorknob to let myself out, but stopped when she called out to me in a wavering tone that appeared to me tentative yet hopeful. "Wait," she said, grabbing my arm with her comforting, ethereal voice. "You don't have to go back, you know." I turned, somewhat confused. "What do you mean? I can't stay in the library all night. I'll be back tomorrow, I promise you. I wouldn't abandon you, you know that." "I do," she replied. "But what about you? Do you intend to waste your life away working for those who aim to exploit you and chasing an idea of love that may not exist? You deserve better. Everyone does, but I can save you. I want to save you. You can join me in the painting. Here is a world without any of the troubles you face. You can stay with me and be happy for once. You only need to take my hand." It was strange to watch something that shouldn't be possible, given what I know to be true about the world. The hand that stretched from the painting was made of flesh and emerged from a pool of colorful oil that should have been a solid canvas. I was mystified by what I saw, and my brain struggled to make the scene fit into the cookie-cutter world with which it was acquainted. The sight of the anomaly should likely have frightened me, but I'd been speaking to a disembodied voice all night. It was no wonder that I was instead intensely focused on the offer the woman had presented to me. Hope rose within me in volumes I hadn't felt in a long time. Recently, I'd only felt hope in fleeting instances and in doses that were barely enough to keep me moving forwards. Brief flashes of thought suggesting my future might be worth holding out for. Now I was faced with a wave of the emotion and new thoughts of what my future could be. What was in the painting? I needed to know. More than that, I wanted to know. I trusted Vera, and I was excited to find a new and beautiful life free from the weight of previous hardship. I stepped up on the table, took hold of her hand, and allowed it to guide me as I ducked into the painting. Imagine the void of space, an expanse with no gravity, light, or sound. Your senses are met with nothing, because in this world there is nothing. This makes the one exception to this rule, all the more eye-catching. Before you is a screen about the size of a small window, emitting soft light. You look closer and see that the screen is portraying the image of a small room in a library with a single desk, a hanging light, and an opened comic book with a handsome hero on the cover. It wasn't hard to figure out what happened. I'd been tricked, betrayed. The figure on the screen, a young woman wearing a red dress, told me everything I needed to know. I called out to her, not wanting to believe the circumstances of my new imprisonment, but she gave no indication that she heard. She only briefly turned to look at the screen before she left the room, closing the door swiftly behind her. I think about her sometimes, from my place in the void. I've had a lot of time to do that, to think. Too long, one might say. But I don't regret my choice. I'm happy here. Things are much simpler when it's just me, alone with my own consciousness. Life is all about struggling and surviving, but humans are different. We are still alive, and so we must struggle and survive. However, our consciousness, if it did not require a physical vessel, could exist outside the rat race of life. Only then would we truly be free. And yet, our thoughts and our consciousness were shaped by life, and the people and the hardships contained within it. As a result, the two facets of humanity cannot be so easily separated. The desire for companionship is embedded deep within our souls. So, as I watched the world from the void, a mind without a body, I only wish that I had someone to share in my immortality. Perhaps someday I'll find what I desire. Hope persists.